This video is intended for the Innovation Lab at DuPont Ball Library at Stetson University. In this video, we'll be going over how to use the Makerbot Print software in conjunction with our Makerbot Replicator 2 printers. From the interface, we can see that we have a X, Y, and Z coordinate at the lower left-hand corner of the viewing plane. That way you can see where you are in relation to the virtual build plate. To navigate this viewport, you can use your mouse. To zoom in and out, use your scroll wheel. To orbit around, use your right-click mouse button so that you can orbit it around. As you can see, you have the X, Y, Z navigation moving along to show you the orientation that the build plate is in. And finally, if you use the scroll wheel and click on it, you can activate the pan feature to move left, right, up, and down. So from the interface, we can see that we have some buttons on the left and on the right. On the left is a couple of ways to view online resources, explore thingiverse.com, Makerbot Store, and learning and support. So there should be some helpful documentation when you click on that icon, most likely appearing in a web browser. On the right-hand side, we have a couple of icons that are tools for arranging your models, an icon for print settings, so you can adjust settings for your model, get some info, and also preview your model. To import a file or an STL into the build plate, you can either go File, Open Project, or Insert File, or you can go to Project Panel, which is another way to insert models into your build plate. Just by clicking that, I will click on this and go to Open. So that's one way to do it. And a third option is to click and drag. So if you happen to have a STL file in an Explorer window like this, you can click on it and drag it in, and it will load as we see in the background. So delete that. So we're going to be dealing with this model and how to set it up for printing. We can see at the bottom right corner that the Replicator 2 printer is chosen. In this program, we only have two different models available. If you happen to see Replicator 2X down here as the active printer, just click on this and hover over this icon, and that SD card looking icon should change to the word select, and then you can select the correct printer, the Replicator 2. So we're going to go over the different tools for arranging and manipulating the object on our build plate. So if you select it, you can go over to Arrange, and at this point the mouse can be used to also move in an XY direction, but it cannot go in a Z direction. If you're not sure if this model is centered, in case you wanted it to be centered, there is a Center Model button at the bottom of this Arrange window. You can also manipulate the movements of where, or the position of where this object is by going to increase or decrease position. And if it's moving in increments that you don't need or do not want, and you want smaller increments, you could manually input the exact dimensions that you want. So instead of 15 to 25, I don't like that jump when using the buttons. I just want to go 20 millimeters in the Y direction, and now it has moved that way. Same thing with Z. If I do 2, it'll go up 2. If I do 22, go up that much. Let's return it back to the bottom with this 0. Arrange build plate button. That is helpful in case you have many objects on the build plate and just kind of want to arrange them quickly. So it'll do it in some orderly fashion when you use that feature. Now let's go on to orient or rotate. Once again, if I hover over it and I actually use a mouse arrow, it still does that 4 directional arrow movement, but that's where we have these helpful buttons for 90-degree rotations, or we can manually input a specific measurement for degrees of rotation. So I'll do that, and you can see it's actually moving around. If I go and hit it 4 times, it will return back to normal. And Z, I'll do a 15-degree movement. And you can see it does that just fine. I'm going to go back to negative 15. Actually, we'll bring it back to the front. Place face on build plate. I'm going to rotate this a little bit. So if you have something that's askew and you really want a certain um, part of the geometry to touch the build plate, but you're just not managing it with minute manual movements within these fields, then you can go to place face on build plates. When you do that, it will read the geometry of the object that you have, and whichever point you have, you will be able to tell it where to lay down. So in this case, I want to do this portion of the model. As you can see, you can orient to plane. I'm going to go with the bottom just so it sits down there, and I'm going to hit done. So that's pretty much the rotation or orient feature in this program. And then we're going to go down to scale. Once again, the mouse is not going to scale it up or down based on you clicking on it, but we still have the fields off to the right. You can see that you can adjust the scale by either a percentage value or by a unit of measurement, in this case millimeters. So let's say I wanted to reduce the height. It's at 100% right now, but I wanted to go down to 50%. So I put 50 in there, and because uniform scaling is checked, all the other proportions will proportionately reduce down or reduce up depending on what value I put in any of these fields. So I'm going to hit enter, and you can see the other one's adjusted to 50 as well, and that's what we have right now, a smaller version of before. If I even do an X and I want to go down to 35%, you'll see that it reduces down even further, but it remains consistent on the other axes. And now if I want to do it by measurement, I want the Z. I can see it's at 16.289 millimeters, and I really needed the Z to be 80 millimeters high. So I can do it right there, just one value, and since uniform scaling is checked still, the other axes will follow in proportion. So if I hit enter, there we go. We have a larger version. I'm going to move this back over here. Scale to max, you can use that button to go to the very maximum dimensions that this object can fill. I'd urge against that though. If you did do that in one direction, I would say then try to rotate the object so that the edges do not come close to the perimeter of the print bed, just because the closer you get to the edge of the print bed, that's where it is coolest, and sometimes models might start to warp up or separate from the build plate, which could make for a warped model. And so that was the three, move, rotate, and scale, so that you can manipulate the object. Oh, there is one more thing. If you do not use uniform scaling, you can start to manipulate the dimensions independently. So let's say I did like the 80 millimeters high of the Z, but now for the X dimension, I want it to be pretty much squished to half. I could probably go right here where I see the 93, and I probably want to be 46, so that's almost half. I hit enter, and now you can see that because uniform scaling is unchecked, you're able to manipulate the object even further. So let's undo that. Okay, now we're going to go to print settings, also found by the gear icon on this toolbar. You can pretty much just generally print with the default settings. Let's check out what they are though. Print mode, balanced. Click on that ellipsis icon, and you can see there's two modes that you can choose from right now, balanced and minimum fill. You could read up on these a little bit more, but if you choose either one, that will be just enough to get you to the preview version where you can look over your model and see whether or not it suits your needs as far as a good build. You also have custom settings. I'm not going to go into that too much, but if you go in here, you can see it starts off with the default print modes, but then you're able to go through the separate categories involved with adjusting print settings, and from there you can actually reduce or increase certain values to property fields. So I'm going to close that. And before you go into preview mode, if your model requires support, like in this case, I have a gap in here of this rectangle leading up to the other space of the fan duct, I probably would want a little bit of support in there, so I would check this, and then that way I can view the support being created within the preview window. So we'll close that. All right, and now we can go into the preview mode. You click on that button and you'll see that you have preparing and estimating preview. It usually doesn't take that long. If it takes really long, you might want to adjust your settings in case there is some value that's either way too detailed or there's just an odd number set in some property value. Alright, so here we can see that the model is being built up. Usually it starts off with a layer highlights and then all layers selected in the layer range. So if you use the slider that is located on the left, you can see just a little bit of the highlights being accented through the build of the model. To get away from that, or to mimic some of the other different types of previews available from other slicer software, select up to layer. So that way you can see how it's being built up to the layer that you're actually on. So go all the way down to the bottom. Very good. You can also uncheck support material or uncheck model material so you can see what the different features look like. Layer highlight, you can leave that on or off. It just highlights the layer that you're actually active on. When it comes to the slider, you can see that you have estimates as far as the material usage and the time estimate to take to build the model with the current settings that you've activated. And you can also play an animation of the extruder nozzle moving as it creates each layer. So that is pretty much the preview section. And if you wanted to export, you can see that I can click on the export at the bottom right. And because I do not have the SD card in the computer, it is asking for a removable disk. So to get around that, you would have to go to the Makerbot Replicator 2 printer that you want, and you want to take the SD card out of the machine only when it's not in use. Then take it to the computer station that you're working at with this program, and when you do export again, now you will see that removable disk is being shown, and the program clearly goes to it, and there are other models located on this SD card as well. So you would save it and make a name, save it, and it would save to this SD card. And after that's done, just make sure to do a proper eject of the SD card, return it to the machine, and then use the button and the navigation window on the Replicator 2 printer to navigate to your print file and then select it to start printing.